Hey guys, in today's video, I was challenged by 2K Games to recreate this section of Egypt from their game Civilization VII, where you can build something you believe in. Keep watching to see how I made it. Hey guys, welcome back to this video. I was on a little bit of a time constraint with this project, so I decided to take a couple of days and 3D model the pyramids and get those printed up right here on my Bamboo Lab X1 Carbon. And I printed the smaller pyramid in resin, as well as some of the small statues and details, which you'll see me adding on here pretty soon. I gave the pyramids a light sand. The Bamboo Lab did a really good job of printing this out. There wasn't too much layer lines showing, and the ones that did kind of came across as like a brick pattern, so it kind of worked in my favor. So here are those resin statues that I did. Obviously I printed these in resin for greater detail. Those came absolutely great. I created little gaps in there for them to fit in. Here are those front statues I printed out on my Saturn IV Ultra. These came out really great as well. Tons of detail. Everything was modeled by me, other than the statues. I forget the website, but there's a website that has historical, like real scans of real statues that are in museums and stuff. And you can download those for free and print them out. If I find it, I'll put it down in the description. Alright, so now it's time to start assembling. We're going to put in the two large statues on either side of this pyramid here. I'm just going to put them in with some super glue, and then I'm going to use some spackle just to fill in the gaps and really make it seem like they're sculpted in there. And I'm just going to use this Q-tip just to get the plaster really in there and remove any excess that I do not need. Now let's go to spray booth and get these all painted up. I'm going to start with the small pyramid and then move on to the medium one. Here I'm using a Super 77 spray adhesive, and you're probably wondering why. And the reason is, if you spray it at a distance, it puts a little texture on whatever it is you're spraying it on. And it dries pretty quick, and then you can paint over it, and it takes the stickiness away. This further hides the layer lines, but also gives you that sort of stone texture that I was looking for. And here we do the same to the larger pyramid. And let's get those little statues we printed painted up as well. Now we can start with the detail painting, starting with the gold. This is a gold bronze I'm using from Vallejo. It does a really good job, keeps its sheen, and we're going to just do the tips of the pyramids here and any details that are gold from the reference images. And here I'm just going to add some highlights with a lighter shade of gold, also from Vallejo. So here I'm starting to paint the sort of cement gray base that's on all of these pyramids. You've probably noticed by now I'm trying to only show you the work I'm doing on one pyramid. It's a little bit repetitive, so to not make you guys watch me do the same thing 3 times. I'm showing you on the large pyramid as much as possible because that's the one that has the most details. Once I wrap up the gray here, we can move on to the green and brown colors. So for this next section, there's these little green triangle details on all the pyramids. And I thought it was easier for me to just create that in Illustrator, print it out, cut it, and then apply them. There was just no way for me to get in there with enough detail to create these perfect triangles. So this printout worked out pretty perfectly, as you can see. Now we can move on to the green details on the pillars. This was really hard to film because my hand covered most of it while I was doing it. So we're just going to cut to them being finished because you won't be able to see much of what I'm doing. Now we can get those front statues glued on, which are super cool and add so much detail to this build. We can just pop those guys on and move on to the next step. So here we're starting some of the weathering process. I'm just taking a very soft brush and some chalk pastel and just brushing it on and making sure it's getting into all the crevices, so it looks like a building that's been around sand and dust and dirt. It just adds a little bit more realism to the build, and it'll show up a little bit better later in the video. Alright, now we can start working on our palm trees. So these are super cheap plastic model scale palm trees that I'm modifying. What you see there is like toothpicks. Those are not the trunks. I'm just painting the palm leaves at this point. So a base of green, a little bit more of an accurate green, some shades of beige and tan from underneath to sort of mimic like the dead leaves, and add some dead grass effects to the trunks, which will again mimic those dead palm leaves that we often see. And when we assemble them all together, they look like this. Now we can hop over to the laser cutter and cut some shapes out to make a hexagon for our base. Based on the size of my laser cutter and material, I had to cut these in 2 halves and glue them together. But it worked out because I did want to double it up in thickness, so I just glued them in opposite direction for ultimate sturdiness. Once the base was dry, I gave it a light sanding and prepped it for paint. So back at the spray booth, and we're gonna first start with giving the bottom and sides a coat of black. This is just to finish it off nicely, and it's easier to do it now than to do it later. So I like to get that done at this point. With our base all painted black, I'm gonna tape off the edges to keep them black and clean throughout the rest of the process. And now I'm gonna start adding some plaster to the top just to create a more natural landscape before we go in with our sand effects. Now that the plaster is dry, we can just give it a light sand, get rid of those high spots, and take it back to the spray booth. So here I'm going to use that Super 77 adhesive spray again to create that texture that we want, but we're going to go a little heavier than we did on the pyramids on this one, because we really want that gritty sand effect. But what's great about this is it's really fine, so to scale it comes off really well. A mistake a lot of people make is using real sand, which at this scale would make absolutely no sense. So this effect works really well, followed by probably 3 or 4 different shades of tan, white, beige to create that effect. And a lot of these are sprayed from a distance, so it gets more of a splattery, sandy effect, and this is what the result looks like. So here I'm just scraping off some of that paint and glue and sand effect that we just created, just to give myself some better adhesion when gluing down the pyramids. The pyramids are going to be glued down with 5-minute epoxy, just to ensure that they really stick down and don't pop off. Super glue would probably work here, but I feel better about it with 5-minute epoxy. And speaking of 5-minute epoxy, here I am mixing it up. This is Bob Smith 5-minute epoxy, my preferred brand. And just going to mix that up, apply it to the pyramids, and get those secured down. And there we go, they are officially attached. Now I'm going to start weathering the sand itself with some chalk pastels, starting with a light dusting of like a tan beige, and then we're going to follow it up by some darker sand around the edges, and a little bit of green, which is seen on the references, a little bit of green in between the 2 smaller pyramids. At this moment, I also noticed that I forgot to paint the tops of the entrances brown, so I went in and took care of that really quick. Now we're going to start adding all the trees and vegetation and all that, and we're going to start that by filling these planters with sort of dirt, coarse sand type of stuff that I have. I'm gonna just put in some super glue and then drop that in and let it dry. Off camera, I modeled and 3D printed a bunch of tiny little pots. So back at the spray booth here, we're just gonna paint them with a terracotta color. And those look great. Now we can add them to our build. All right, back at the pyramids, I'm also gonna add a little bird statue that I only noticed now. So I quickly modeled that, 3D printed it and painted it gold, and we're just gonna stick that on right there. And now we can add our pots. Here I'm making the green flags that are seen hanging in the front behind those statues that we made. Here I'm just using green construction paper, cutting it to shape and fitting it through a piece of styrene that I painted gold off camera. And now we can just pop those in, and it's really starting to look like the pyramids from the game. I also made this little cart that I noticed while looking at the reference images, so I made that, painted it up, and popped that in as well. Fun little detail. Now we can drill some holes and start putting in our palm trees. For some reason I didn't record me putting in those first two in the front, but they went in the same way as all of these. So I drill a hole, put some accelerant in it, some super glue on the tip of the palm tree, and pop it in. And then I just added them all around the base. So in the game, there's these sort of reddish trees. I'm gonna use these woodland scenic branches as bases, but they're way too big. So first I'm gonna shape them and cut them to size. And then I'm gonna use this green stuff I found in my bin. I'm gonna paint it like a reddish with like a couple of different shades of red and apply that to the tree. Now initially these were a little bit too big, so I did have to trim them down and repaint them off camera. But once I popped them in, they looked great. Now to the satisfying part of removing the tape that was protecting the black edges. I created a plaque in Illustrator and sent that off to my laser cutter and glued that down to the model, and that marks it as officially done. Here is the final reveal of Egypt from Civilization VII.